make it
Truth Frequency Radio.
Astronauts to the moon.
Ten, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,
Not to get off track here, but I feel like we're in the Truman Show, and we're in a snow globe, and they just shook it up.
Welcome to reality.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and children of all ages. You are tuned into your protection from deception. That's right here at truthfrequencyradio.com. And I remind you that I am photoshopped, but that's because, well, I have to be. And photoshopped or not, you are dialed in. You are correctly gathering the required signal to be directly receiving the transmission of the number one show on TFR on Monday nights between the hours of 6 and 9 p.m. Pacific, 9 to midnight Eastern. That show is Jeranism Monday Night Raw, and it starts now. Now. There you go. I'm your host, Jaren from Jeranism, and to my left is no one. And to my right is no one. Yeah, it's rough. Currently writing solo.
I'm riding solo, I'm riding solo, I'm riding solo, solo. Yeah, I'm feeling good tonight. Finally doing me.
I wouldn't know if that's necessarily feeling good, but I'm here. I am in attendance, and that's saying something. So, a few things to talk about this evening. We've got a special treat for you coming up at the end of the first half hour. An interview, I hope. I haven't gotten confirmation, but we did talk about this just the other day. So we should be having Gary Corsair on. Gary is the foremost authority on Thomas Ronald Barron. If you don't know who that is, it is the gentleman who filled out the 500-page report. I believe he worked for North American at the time around Apollo 1 when the fire happened that killed Gus Grissom and the two other astronauts. And Thomas Ronald Barron had made some complaints about the way things were handled there, wrote a 500-page report, went into Congress, gave his little deposition or his, his testimony, and then they basically got mad at him for, not being a good witness or whatever, sent him on his way. The 500-page report has since been lost, and nobody has ever found it. And less than a week later, Thomas Ronald Barron, his wife, and his daughter were all killed by a train. So it is a major interest into anybody who's looked into NASA being the deceiving liars that they are. And so I want to get his opinion. I don't know fully if he is a Thomas Ronald Barron was killed guy or if he is no, this is just a fluke accident and people drive into trains all the time. So we're going to find out. But he is the kind of foremost authority. I know he's gone there, talked to neighbors. I did read a couple posts of his on a blog. He'll talk to us about the fact that I can't even tell you if it was the day before or the day after, sometime around when he was killed, there was people in his house basically trying to find this report and basically breaking into his house. Neighbors were saying they saw men in black basically break into his house. So I want to find out all those things, and we should be able to do that. Hopefully, if not this week, it'll be next week. We've tried to do this a couple times already and have failed. But he is supposed to be on the show from 6:30 until 7:30 this evening. For those of you on the East Coast, who cares? That's the way I look at it. So let's move on. No, I'm just kidding. It's be 9:30 to 10:30 for those of you in the East Coast that had just basically stayed there since you came across the water. You never tried to make anything of your life. You didn't try to move out west. You just staying there, staying put in the East Coast. Kind of shows laziness to me. But that's just me. I don't know. could be an extremely advantageous person on the East Coast. I don't know. Maybe you already came to the West Coast and went back. Maybe you're twice as advantageous as me. I don't know. Can't say. So I wanted to say hello to the Sugar Bushwhackers out there and all the listeners, and for everyone in the chat. Thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it so much. I wouldn't have it any other way. Wanted to say hello to everyone down under. Those are our Australian listeners. Well, to them, we're down under. It's kind of crazy. See, we live on this ball, and everything pulls to the center because men say so. So you really need to get that through your heads before you get told to go back to fourth grade physics, which is what inevitably comes with questioning where you live, because that's what science has become. So speaking of science, I wanted to point out something. If you saw Globebusters yesterday, you've already seen this little gem that was found. Many people will remember. Oh, by the way, I didn't say hello to the people that are perpendicular. I sometimes forget them. They're easily forgotten, the perpendicular ones. I'm more... I kind of really like the upright ones. So anybody perpendicular, upside down, to me, it's kind of a less human position to be in. That's the way I would describe it. But the crazy thing is to them, they are in, it just gets difficult to discuss, really, because it's like a whole bunch of metaphysicalness, and you have to have all these presuppositional beliefs, and you have to be indoctrinated from the age of 4, and it has to be in every commercial at the start of every movie and every logo. And of course, we've always known it was a globe. That's all part of it. We can get into that some other time, or you can listen to the previous 300 shows that I've done. I'm sure I discussed it in there. But what I wanted to bring up or show, if I can find it here quickly, is if you remember the Stephen Hawking show, which is so interesting that 2015 was kind of the resurgence of this idea that the Earth could possibly not be what we were taught. You're kidding me. No, I'm not kidding you. Couldn't be, right? But we came out with that in 2015, or, many of us started speaking out about it, making videos. And in 2016, here comes Mr. Speak and Spell himself, Stephen Hawking. Of course, this was prior to him dying. Not that it makes much of a difference. I'm sure you can still get that voice out of typing. So, but he was part of the show. He made up the show called Genius. And the show was called Genius because it was going to be Stephen Hawking taking ordinary people and then giving them tasks so that they could figure out where they live. So that's the way it's billed. You can look it up. Look up Stephen Hawking Genius Season 1, and everywhere it will say Stephen Hawking takes ordinary people and shows you that we can figure out where we live based on what these ordinary people say. Even though we could just go to Jordan Maxwell. I mean, he's got some of the best quotes I've ever heard when it comes to exactly what's going on with science. And if I can get my thing to play, then life would be good. I don't know. That might not happen. There you go.
So as far as I'm concerned, I've had enough of science. I've had enough of all this doctors and PhDs. I know what's going on here. We've been lied to, and I mean big time.
Has a more true thing ever been said? I don't think so myself. So we're going to bring this up if I can get it to come up here. There it is. Let me pause it right from the beginning. All right. So we got that one ready to go. And then what I want to show you is, so this show was supposed to be these 3 regular people. Their 3 names are Jim or James Fitzsimmons is one of the guys. He's a teacher, PE teacher, school teacher, but now he's in the physical education department. That to me would be an ordinary person, I guess. Teacher, iffy, but to me he seems like a very ordinary person. If you remember, there was an Asian girl, small in stature, just an ordinary person unless you search her on the internet. Her name is Joy, NG is the last name. I don't know how you pronounce that. I don't know if it's Nig or N. Not really sure. The first name is pretty easy. It's Joy. But I can't get to the last name, even though it's less letters. Imagine that. So when you look up Joy NG, what does she do? What is her job on her day-to-day basis? You don't have to look far until you find posts from NASA. You're like, what? Hold on a second. What do you mean? She couldn't possibly work for NASA, right? How about she works at Goddard? She is a NASA employee. She is a science major. She has a degree in science. Here it says, what's your educational background? I earned an undergraduate degree in biology at the University of Nottingham in England and a master's degree in science media production at Imperial College London. So this ordinary person, scientist, is going to be the one who's actually showing you the shape of the Earth and how easy it is when you have all these presuppositions to come to that conclusion. Why did you come to Goddard? She explains that. What's her favorite medium? I thought one of the best questions is on here. When did you decide to become a science storyteller? You know, like getting up in front of PBS audiences and telling them that they live on a ball, because if you presuppose all these things, then it can come true for you. Even though not one of us on Earth, you can make fun of each other. You can call me a loser because I believe in the flat Earth. Nobody's seen the Earth. You haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. No one's been to space. No one's ever been to a planet. No one's ever been to the moon. And yet, just take it in. Keep giving your money to them, because, you know, they've got to be telling the truth. They lie about everything else that we can actually touch and feel. But the one place we can't go, that place they're telling the truth about, in my opinion. Why would they lie about it? It doesn't make any sense. Why not just tell the truth about that and then lie about everything that we can actually go follow up and check? So, yeah, she is an employee with Goddard. She works for the NASA Visualization. That didn't come out right. The NASA Visualization app. That's kind of what she does, is make videos and science storytell. But again, there's nothing really, I mean, yeah, they called it ordinary people. Somebody could say, well, she is ordinary people work at NASA. All right, well, great. That's like, Coke having some sort of Coke versus Pepsi contest and saying they're going to take ordinary people to test it. And by the way, all these people work for Coke. You know, they are ordinary people. Ordinary people do work for Coke. But it is a Pepsi versus Coke challenge. And we picked ordinary people randomly. They just happen to work at Coke. They're ordinary people. Geez, why would you argue against that? But the other one that's a problem is in that show, we have a girl by the name of Kat Bobineau. That is her name, C-A-T, Kat Bobineau. And I want to have you listen to something very important here, and I need to bring it up. It's season 1, episode 6, and we'll put in Hawking here. Oh, and I want to show you this. Did I need to put in YouTube? Probably. One little statement that she makes in here that I thought was very interesting. Basically, what they're doing is they're trying to come up with a scale model of the Earth. This is their goal. And they're kind of trying to figure out how they're going to do it. And then this Kat Bobineau has this great idea where she says, well, we could just pretend the moon, the model moon, is the same size as the moon in the sky. And so she kind of crouches down and gets to a position where she can see when the model moon covers the real moon. At which point she says that must be the distance it is away from Earth. Wow, congratulations. That was brilliant. But there is one little problem with that whole statement, and let's jump there if I can. Okay, we don't need to hear you in your ads.
I did it. Let's go to Wix.com.
Let's skip forward here. Okay, so we're going to go to where they're doing this big scale thing here. And again, like I said, sorry, I'm going to turn that. Like I said, we've got her doing this kind of crazy, conclusion. And let's hear what she's got to say about it.
The real moon is about 240,000 miles away.
It worked. I'm not a scientist, and to be able to just do that off a whim, and it just came to me, that was
pretty awesome.
That was incredible.
So let's hear her again. What did she say there? What was the first thing she says?
Scientist, and
you what?
It worked. I'm not a scientist. And
you're not a scientist. Okay. So she said it worked. I'm not a scientist, but to be able to come up with what I did is certainly incredible. So then here's the beginning of a video I found from her from a year earlier than the show, 2015. Let's hear what she says here.
My name is Kat Bobineau, and I am a scientist.
Wait, what? I thought you...
140,000
could have sworn you just said something else. Let me think.
It worked. I'm not a scientist.
You're not a scientist. Okay, I was confused because I thought I heard you say here. Let me hear again.
My name is Kat Bobineau, and I am a scientist.
That seems like a lie to me. Maybe I'm wrong. But if you are on a show where you're supposed to be ordinary people, quote unquote, picked by Stephen Hawking to discover for us the shape of the Earth, and you're a scientist, but then somebody writes in the script of the video for you to say, I'm not a scientist, but blobbity blobbity blue. And then you actually speak those words. Who are these people? I mean, if somebody gave me a script and I'm a scientist and the script says, I'm not a scientist, I would point right to and say, I'm not saying this. Who wrote this for me? I am a scientist. Why would I say that? Oh, it's because it's for the show and it'd be good for... No, I'm sorry. If it's for science, why would I lie? That doesn't seem like it's going to help people. And these are the kind of things that people just let blow over. I'm sure all the globies that listen right now are just letting it go right. That's not a big deal. It's not a big deal that they lie to you on this show where it's ordinary people showing you where you live, when it's actually two scientists, one that works for NASA, one that is a science pusher. She has her own show called In the Know with Kat Bobineau. This is deceptive on purpose. And the experiments were horrendous. If any flat earther or any globe earther performed the experiment in the way that they show on that little film, they would get laughed out of the YouTube building because they didn't level the laser from the beginning, which is a problem because they show that the distance away from the water is 2 feet and 7 inches. And then they have the boat drive out 500 feet. And if anybody doesn't know what the curvature drop in 500 feet is, it's about 0.01 inches. And it actually might be 0.1 inches. Not really sure exactly, but it's around there, one or the other. Either 0.1 inches or 0.1 inches. That's for 500 feet. So if it was at 2.7 feet or 2 feet 7 inches at the waterline when the laser was going out, then it should be at 2 feet 7.1 inches. And when you watch the video, the laser is clearly hitting higher than 2.7 feet on the boat, but they're only 500 feet. So that tells you right away that the laser is angled up. And then they drive out to 3 miles and they say, oh, look at the lasers way above the boat. We got to climb up here with a board and we got to mark. It's just nonsense. It's the worst experiment ever. Clearly was done just to come to the conclusions that the curvature calculator tells you. Of course, they got exactly 6 feet at 3 miles and 24 feet at 6 miles. If you haven't seen that video, they actually have a helicopter. Now, remember, this is only 6 feet. I'm sorry. This is only 6 miles across this little lake. And remember when they did the test over at the Salton Sea, that was 10 miles, I believe, or 12. But at 6 miles, they actually show in this video a helicopter landing. So the helicopter lands on the other side of the water, and the guy can't see it with the telescope. And then it rises up, and he says, tell me when, I'll tell you when I can see you. And then he gets to a certain height. He's like, okay, I see you now. Stand right there and tell me what your height is. The guy looks at his altimeter and says, 24 feet. And then they all go crazy because that's exactly what it's supposed to be for 6 miles. Congratulations, science. Isn't it amazing how when you set yourself up for success, that's what you see. When you want a ball Earth to be shown in your experiments, it's easy. The actual act of science is to destroy, not to constantly build up false ideas and to keep coming up with the same experiments that show you what you want to see. You should be doing tests that disprove your model, not that prove your model. But of course, they could never do that because their model will be disproven, which is known by many people at this time. So we have Kat Bobineau telling lies on the show. We've got Joy NG. Then what happened was with Mr. Jim Fitzsimmons, I happened to be reading a little, it's like a blog post or somebody who's asking him questions. And I came across something interesting that he said. And let me bring that up here for you. Jim Fitzsimmons, genius. I don't know how did I find him? I don't remember. Let's see here. Yes, that's that one. Well, anyway, basically he's talking in this interview, and somebody's asking him about integrity, and he says, "Oh, we're constantly challenged every day on our integrity, and what makes a great person is those who can rise to the challenge and never have their integrity questioned. Blah 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 blah." Great. But as we just saw, basically with the 2 examples I just gave, clearly there's a problem with the integrity of this show and the tests that they performed. So I emailed him and laid out some of my questions, said if you would get back to me, I'd appreciate it. It can be off the record. It can be on the record. It can be on the interview on one of my shows, or it can be a private conversation. Whatever he wants, I'm willing to listen just because I have questions about how these tests were performed. Were these actually numbers that they got ahead of time that they were just trying to get to? How do you allow a real scientist on the show to say, I'm not a scientist, but how is that not, if you're Mr. Integrity, shouldn't you say, wait, I thought you are a scientist. Well, I am. Well, why would you lie on the show? Because they told me to. Well, then I don't want to be on the show. I don't think it's a good idea if we're trying to push science to go around telling lies just like it's not a good idea to tell people that water goes down the opposite direction in each hemisphere, because it's a lie. And it's not a good idea to tell people that gravity pulls things to the center, because there's no evidence of it. And we could go on and on and on and on and on with all the reasons that everything we've been told is a lie, which most people know. Many of you out there still fight it, still hold tightly onto your Wookiee, onto your security blanket. I understand it's a tough thing to admit that your entire life you have felt like you lived on a spinning ball in space, and really all it takes is an afternoon of doing a little bit of searching, and you should recognize that it's a deception. Otherwise, you simply have adopted the beliefs of men who have a worldview that says that there cannot be any kind of creator, that we are not a created being. We are an animal that evolved like every other animal, even though we have voice boxes nobody else does, and all the things that we have that no other animal has, and all the intelligence. I mean, eventually these animals, I guess, will find this intelligence, or I'm not really sure how it works anymore. Evolution changes its opinion every other day as new stuff is found. Just like they'll start to have to change now. Now I hear that zinc can hold in the carbon, these fibers in these dinosaur bones. Previously, it was thought, maximum time, you're talking maybe a few thousand years, or maybe even 50,000 years or 100,000 years, that you could keep this soft tissue in the dinosaur bones. But no, Mary Switzer, amongst many scientists and paleontologists, have uncovered bones with the carbon still in them, with the soft tissue fiber still in them. So now it is believed that iron preserves these soft tissues for 60 to 100 million years. So that's what happens with science, is it has to be that way, because they can't really look at it and say, well, geez, maybe all these dinosaurs are actually much closer. Maybe they're 10,000, 20,000 years old, because that's what carbon dating would bring back as a date. No, instead, they just have their presuppositional, their foundational beliefs that they have to adhere to. And so then they base everything off that, just like the Earth cannot be in the center. So everything that's ever discovered from any perspective, from any astronomer, always has to be on their model where the Earth is not the center. Not because observations led them that way. No. Observations are very simple. We are the center of the universe. Every galaxy moves away from us. Nothing comes towards us. Sounds like we're the center. Yeah, but not when you have a worldview that says that that's intolerable, that it is the absolute horror of a unique position. Then you make science about your personal worldview. It's no longer science at that point. And once you've put it into textbooks and taught it to children and given degrees to people and told them that they're smart because they can regurgitate it, then you're stuck with the world that we have today. And it is a lie. So we were talking about Mr. Fitzsimmons. I basically tried to contact him, and he responded, believe it or not, and said something to the effect of, who are you? Why do you want to know these answers? And for what purpose? So I responded and said, well, I'm nobody special. I just have a radio show and a YouTube channel, and I've been looking into this for 3 or 4 years. And the show was very interesting to me because I said, okay, here's real science, real scientists in Stephen Hawking, ordinary people. Let's see what they come up with. And it's crap. It is a lie. It's make-believe. It's not real. None of the tests were correctly administered. And they want you to figure out, how are we going to figure out the distance from the Earth to the sun? But then they give them a big, giant sun to blow up that is the size, they say, of the sun. And then they go through all these testing. They get to the end, like, we figured it out. We know now the sizes of all these planets in the sun and the Earth. No, you don't. They gave you the size of the sun. Guess what? Rewind the clock, go back 2,000 years, and you tell me who gave us the size of the sun. Who showed up on your porch with a huge blow-up sun and said, here's the size of the sun, now figure everything else out? The answer is nobody. The answer is not a person. So you can believe in the mathematical treatise that is the heliocentric model if you'd like. You are free to believe whatever you would like, and I hope that you understand that I am free to believe whatever I like. And I think to believe that I am living on a giant rock spinning in outer space, held up by a magical force that is the weakest force that there is, yet holds the Earth in orbit of the sun, holds the moon in orbit of the Earth, and that we're all constantly falling and spinning while we're falling and racing around the galaxy, and the galaxy's racing around. Yeah, if I'm going to believe that, there's something that they need to bring to me called evidence. Evidence. But guess what? I don't get any. I get mathematical equations on paper, and I can talk all I want about my fake theme park and tell them, hey, I can give you the mathematical equations for every ride in my fake theme park. The theme park is still fake. Nobody gets it. They keep wanting to back up and argue with us. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Jeranism Monday Night Raw, and hopefully we're back with Gary Corsair. All right, welcome back. You're listening to Jeranism Monday Night Raw, and we almost had Gary on the phone, and then I lost him. So I don't know. We're going to try it again, see if he answers. Gary, are you there? Great, awesome. Let's start all over. So I was telling everybody ahead of time in the first half hour, just a little bit about the Thomas Ronald Barron story. Not much at all, but then I said that you were the authority on it. So I guess you could tell everybody how you've become that authority and what you've done in the media in your lifetime.
Okay, well, I'm just basically somebody who's started in the media when I was in high school. So 42 years later, I'm still trying to dig up and tell compelling stories. I've been in newspaper, radio, magazine, television, worked with some great people, found some great stories. I'm presently the publisher and editor of a small weekly newspaper in rural North Carolina. But the Thomas Ronald Barron story was certainly one of the more compelling stories that I came across in my career.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you actually went down and interviewed neighbors and family and friends. Is that true?
Yeah, I interviewed everybody I could find, relatives, the ex-wife, the child who actually survived the crash that killed Tom Barron, the state trooper who investigated it, people who had worked with Barron, just anybody I could find that had a connection.
Interesting. Now, I did not know. So there was actually, I know that he died as well as his wife and then a stepdaughter. So there was actually another child that survived, huh?
Yeah, there were two stepdaughters in the car. There was Penny and Robin. Robin survived and has been, I don't want to say reclusive, but had never talked about her life with Tom Barron or the accident until I found her.
Wow, interesting. I did not know that. And I thought that I had done a fair amount of research on that situation. So how old was she at the time of the accident?
I want to say she was 7, but it may have been 5. Off the top of my head, I want to say 7. I think it was 7. And I think Penny, her younger sister, was 5, but it might have been 5 and 3. Forgive me.
No problem. And I know that there's been on again, off again, conversations about this, because I heard many people who say that at some point it was determined that it was a suicide, and I've heard other people say, no, that was never even mentioned. It was never even part of the story. So can you tell me what actually you've heard, or what is the actual official cause of death?
The actual official cause of death, according to the coroner and the state trooper, was that it was an accident. Interestingly, the suicide rumor was pretty strong, and of course the rumor that NASA had him killed is also pretty strong. But Robin, who survived the crash and obviously had severe trauma most of her life, she thought it was a suicide. But in talking with her, she's convinced but not convincing, because she talks about, I know he was being followed and harassed, and his report disappeared, and he washed his car right before we went on that final ride, and who would wash their car if they were going to plan to crash it into a train? So she's very
interesting.
I wonder if maybe a little bit of hypnosis or something might open up what really happened in her mind.
Very interesting. And if I'm not mistaken, again, I always have to premise that because I've done so much research on this, but I know there's so many forums, which is where you get a lot of this information. So sometimes people just repeat garbage and it isn't true. So is it true that the car hit the train, not the train hit the car?
Exactly. And by the way, I think you're the second most foremost authority on this case.
Yeah, right. I just do a lot of reading.
You're in good shape. Yeah, it was a really bizarre accident, and I visited the accident site in addition to looking at any report I could find. But it happened less than 0.7 of a mile from Barron's house, on train tracks that he would have crossed every day that he lived there. I mean, they ran parallel to his home. Even Robin talked about, as soon as you pulled out the driveway, there the train tracks were. So the proximity of the accident to me was kind of weird. But according to the report, the train was actually reversing. And Barron, the troopers speculated that Barron was trying to beat the train across the crossing, which is totally out of character for Barron, but that's another story. And that Barron struck the rear coupler of the train, and that the train pushed his car 300 yards down the track, and before it finally turned over. What I find interesting is that the impact, I think, was estimated to be like 35 miles an hour, yet 3 of the people in the car had fractured skulls, according to the state trooper's report. I don't know if that's consistent with an accident where a car glances a train and then is flipped over, but
yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I used to my only knowledge about trains is I rode a train to school for 4 years when I went to high school. But I'm trying to think when they reverse a train, they don't reverse it at high speed, do they?
Exactly. Yeah, it was estimated that it was about 40 miles an hour, and may have been slightly slower. Interestingly, the train had been dispatched from a NASA switching yard, which is another kind of creepy fact about the thing, that NASA had a connection to the train that struck Barron's car, or Barron's car struck, I should say.
Wow. But as far as Penny remembers, then she just, and of course, I'm sorry, Robin. Robin's the one that survived?
Right.
Okay.
Robin remembers them having dinner, and then Barron saying, "Let's go for a ride," them getting in the car, and she remembers him turning around to make sure that Penny was strapped in, seat belted in, but he didn't bother with Robin, and I think Robin told me she was standing on the seat. And that was the last thing she remembered before the crash. The next thing she remembered was looking up and her whole field of vision being blue, and her being perplexed, what she was seeing. Years later, she realized that she was seeing the engine of the train, which was painted a bright blue. And so she woke up basically alongside the car and the dead bodies of her family.
Wow. Unbelievable. That's a crazy story. So I guess the other thing that people are usually confused about or misunderstood, that really he wasn't considered a very good witness at the time of the trial, right? Because he had made some statements about people that couldn't be corroborated, basically. And that could be one of the reasons that this 500-page report went missing. Of course, if people in I'm definitely a believer that NASA has been on a mission of deceit from 1958 on. But, so I'm a believer that they probably did. The only thing that doesn't jive with me about it is, would you do that? Would you go just off somebody less than a week after this report and then hide the report? It almost seems like it's too obvious. And sometimes I think that's kind of a clue, But
and I think about that too. And then I wonder if part of it was allowing Robin to live and, doing a little brainwashing on her. I don't want to get too far out there, but Robin remembers.
You've never listened to my show before.
Yeah, I'm not far enough out there.
Right,
Robin
exactly.
It's funny things kids remember, and Robin probably has a lot of suppressed memories, but she remembers men dressed in black standing in her hotel, in her hospital room day after day, and her not knowing who they were or why they were there. They looked very, official in suit and tie, and then she didn't recall them ever saying anything, but they were just always kind of there for a couple of weeks. And I don't know enough mind control or anything like that, but I know Barron was followed. I know that his trailer was broken into and was ransacked before he was killed. I know he had confided in others that he had been threatened. So I don't know. I don't know how you murder somebody and make it look like it wasn't a murder. I do know that
pretty tough to do.
Before the murder, NASA went to great lengths to silence Barron, including discrediting him in the congressional hearing that you talk about. And Barron just kept coming. I mean, he was that squeaky wheel that wasn't going to go away.
Right.
And I'm looking going, what, if he had something that you didn't want in front of the public, how in the world would you shut him up? I mean, they tried everything short of killing him.
Right. And he worked for North American, though, right? Not NASA, is that correct?
Exactly, yeah. He was a safety inspector in North American for 16 months. But they actually were the ones tasked with building the Apollo 1 space capsule, and Barron examined it, many times. So.
Yeah, and I've read all the his testimony, and he spoke a lot about the disorganization, people working different shifts, people upset that they got moved shifts, some jobs where people didn't even really know what to do. They would be highly trained people in one department, but they would be given basically like shipping and receiving jobs where they're just stacking boxes. So, I mean, I think he had definitely some evidence that showed that things weren't really going as well. And I know about Gus Grissom and putting the lemon, hanging that on the LEM to kind of show, hey, if we can't even communicate between these two buildings, how are we going to go to the moon? And, did they off him too? There's so many questions here. What's some of the other things that you would want to talk about?
Well, Barron, you bring out a good point, because most of Barron's report is what I would classify nitpicky stuff. Guys who weren't qualified to be on this piece of equipment, or, they left metal shavings on top of, the capsule at the end of their shift. A lot of it was kind of piddly stuff, but he also talked about a test equipment overheating and, a flash fire in one place. Interestingly, he talked about a damaged O-ring that he found, and we all know what a damaged O-ring turned out to be later with the space shuttle.
Right.
That was the cause of a terrible tragedy. So, and then what's interesting is that, NASA did just such a good job of keeping everything internal. That was their whole thing. They actually had a report about 4 months before Barron's from General Phillips, who outlined many of the same concerns that he had with North American, because he had toured the plant, I think, in July of '66. So they already knew a lot of the stuff that Barron told them, but they went to great lengths to discredit Barron, that, it's vague, it's inconsequential. And the number one strike against Barron, JC, is that he was a great employee when he was there, but there were long the time when he wasn't there because he had so many health problems. I mean, he would miss weeks at a time, with diabetic incidents where he was in the hospital, and then he'd pop back in. And, I don't know how in touch you can be when you're missing long stretches of work at a time, but I know the coworkers got to the point where they resented him, because things moved along pretty good when Barron was sick, but then when he got there were all these discrepancy reports that they had to deal with.
Right. And then, go ahead.
He slowed the whole thing down, and they were behind schedule anyway. So, but the interesting thing is, everybody knows about Barron's 55-page report, and I think it's probably public access, but a copy that I have, NASA answers each and every charge. I mean, they went through with a fine-tooth comb, and it's amazing how many times whoever the NASA official was who addressed it said, yeah, this is right, but it's been taken care of. So I know there are critics of Barron who say, the guy didn't have anything. Why would you kill a guy who he was low level and really didn't know anything? But NASA seemed to take him pretty seriously, that they addressed every single point that he made. And most of them, the response was, yeah, this is true. We looked into it, and the guy was right.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, again, you said a 55-page report. So that is the report that is accessible today, but in the transcripts, basically, he's talking about a 500-page report, and they basically kind of tell him, well, that's too long, or that, that's too much for us to read, but then the report is missing as far as we know today, right?
Yeah, that's pretty incredible that he had it right there under his arm and said, you guys need to have this. And they said, it'll cost too much to print it. And I will say this. First of all, I'm writing a book about this, which you've probably already mentioned. But I found another 200-plus pages that Barron had compiled after the 55-page report that I don't think anybody knows the existence of. And, of course, that'll be unveiled in my forthcoming book.
Oh, very cool. So you're writing a book specifically about Thomas Ronald Barron, then?
Exactly. I just got off the phone a couple hours ago with an agent who's very excited about the project. But a big part of what we're excited about is that we found what I think is half of Barron's 500-page report that was misfiled at the National Archives, and the investigator that I paid found it, kind of stumbled upon it. So now I have another 200 pages that Barron was going to present.
Wow. And you've already gone through those. Was there anything that looks like it's something that they definitely wouldn't want out? That, you know, what I'm talking about is something not in the 55 pages, but in the 200 you found?
I can only say yes. I think Barron was really disappointed at the reaction to his 55-page report, but you know, he is a pretty smart guy, and he said, I've got to get them more concrete stuff. What's interesting about the 220 pages I found is that it's obvious to me that a good deal of the material came from other people inside of the North American plant. So
right.
I believe Barron was meeting with other employees. I think Melvin Holmberg, who kind of threw him under the bus, was one of the guys who was supplying him.
That's
but
the guy
Barron,
that he saw at the grocery store or something, and they talked a few times?
They would meet in the drugstore, and I talked to Holmberg's nephew, and he acted like his uncle had some regrets about how he did Tom Barron, and that he actually believed Barron was on the right track. But there's stuff in there that I don't think Barron would have known, because he was fired on January 5th, 1967, and yet this report kept growing all the way up, you know, to his death in April.
Which would, I guess, make sense to me if you were, you know, if you're fired from a job like that, you might be the only person that really could write that report, whereas everyone else afraid of their job, they don't want to lose their job. Maybe he was able to get some testimonies from people that they otherwise wouldn't have said, kind of like Holmberg, who then basically denied saying some of the things that Thomas Ronald Barron said that he said, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you said before, when you look at the transcript of the testimony, Barron doesn't come off very well. He's not very convincing. But if you read it really closely, and I know you have, it seems like he's trying to protect sources, because they keep, well, you know, give us a name. Who told you that? Because at one point Barron alludes to, you know, I talked to someone who's told me he knows what caused the fire. And they just keep hammering him, and he's trying to evade them every way he can. And finally they're like, you know, give us a name. And of course he coughs up Holmberg, and then 10 minutes later, the guy mysteriously appears. He just happened to be out in the hallway, and then totally discredits what Barron said. So I think a lot of people got Barron information with the caveat, look, if this ever comes push to shove, I'll deny I ever told you this. And Barron, very much alone. I mean, I think that was part of the deal, was he knew that these guys were giving him the straight dope, but they were going to deny it if they ever got called on it, because they wanted to keep their jobs.
Absolutely. I think it's a major problem in the world today. Now, you said earlier that you're writing the book. What is the name of that going to be, and when can people expect that? Sounds like something I'd like to read.
Yeah, our working title is The Loneliest Man, and I don't know if our publisher, if we get one, that's the other big if.
Right.
Every age something, get a publisher's another. But that's the working title, is The Loneliest Man, and we hope for it to be out sometime next year.
Okay.
And it'll be based on my years of research, and of course there will be a big chapter in there from Robin, who speaks to who the Tom Barron was that she knew. Which, you know, I've never really seen a good biography of Barron, or any attempt for somebody to figure out who he was.
You know, it's tough to find any kind of official source other than, I think he's got a page at nasa.gov that kind of talks about him. But besides that, there's really not a lot. It's like I said, it's a lot of forums and people talking, but I don't see any kind of official conversation about it.
Yeah, I'm like you. I was kind of shocked when I started to dig into it. Then, of course, when I went over to Mims and Titusville, there were a lot of people who either had met Barron that I talked to, or had an opinion. I mean, a lot of people there knew the name 40 years after the fact. But the position I'm going to take in the book is that, you know, Ralph Nader coined the term whistleblower in 1970, and my stance is that Tom Barron was the first whistleblower, and yet nobody knows him. I mean, there's movies about Karen Silkwood and Aaron Brockovich and Frank Serpico, and I think Barron blew a bigger whistle on a bigger stage and had so much more to lose than anybody that we now associate the term with who is famous. The fact that nobody knows who Tom Barron is a testament to NASA's PR machine, that they discredited the guy early on and just buried him ever since.
Yeah, and if people don't know about that, I mean, there's so much stuff you can see about what they told astronauts and how they had to act in public. It was, I mean, they were all about PR. They were all about getting people's buy-in. They wanted as many people watching the moon landings as possible. One thing that I don't think people really know either is children were given the day off of school, if I'm not mistaken, which is, I'm not a believer that we've ever been to the moon, but I trust, people can have their own beliefs. That's fine with me. But one of the reasons for that is that they had it like actually in the newspaper, a written thing basically saying what time they'd be landing, what time they'd be getting out, what time they'd be having the call with the president. So they had all this stuff like a schedule, and then they gave children the day off of school. And to me, it's the first time you've ever landed a craft with people in it on a foreign body 240,000 miles away, that you would be much more careful than having all the children at home watching if something happened and they all died. Or so to me, it just seems like that this was like a TV show that they wanted a lot of people watching at a certain time, and they had a schedule so you knew when everything would be taking place. So, I mean, that's just me. I think that too much about NASA is all about getting the public's buy-in for whatever they're doing, and of course they make a lot of money. But to each their own on their belief about the moon landings. The other question I was going to ask. Go ahead.
No, you make a lot of sense, and to me, NASA probably had the greatest PR effort of any company I've seen. When you go back and look at how many rockets blew up on the launch pad and how many people died and just how many failures they had. I mean, every year they had something exploding prematurely, and yet they continued to get millions and millions and millions to continue this every year, because to say anything bad about NASA was akin to spitting on the flag.
Yeah, you're not allowed to do it. I get reminded every day. $52 million a day is how much they make.
Wow. So it's incredible. And when you think about that kind of money and that kind of power, maybe there wasn't a high-level discussion of hey, we got to rub out Tom Barron, but maybe it was just somebody saying, you know what, it'd be nice if this guy went away, and somebody going, okay, I can make that happen, and we don't need to know the details, but boy, it'd be great if this guy disappeared, and then he disappears, so.
And I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You said that there was head trauma on the 3 individuals that died?
Yeah.
Into the truth frequency. Your protection from deception. This is Truth Frequency Radio.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining me. This is Jeranism Monday Night Raw. We have a few more minutes with Gary Corsair. He's the winner of 64 journalism awards, including Best Investigative Reporting. And one of the many topics that he has researched extensively is the all-too-forgotten, mysterious, or at least strangely timed death of Thomas Ronald Barron, who just about a week after giving his report to Congress regarding North American and NASA and the fire of Apollo 1 was either killed or committed suicide, or it's kind of unknown. All we know is that he hit a train, and him and his wife and one of his stepdaughters died. So, Gary, one of the things that I was going to ask you is you mentioned that there was people that went through his house. Who is that report from? Not the daughter, right?
No, this was actually, I hate to say it, JC, it was third hand. I interviewed the man who lives on the Barron property now, and he knew a little bit about Barron. And we were talking one day, and he said, "Well, I wish you could have interviewed my neighbor." He said he died last year, and he said he knew Tom personally, and he said he told me a story about the night that Barron died, that a sedan pulled up over at his trailer with its lights off, and he said 2 men went in the trailer, and he said, "I watched out the window." I think he lived about maybe 80 yards away, something like that. And he said they had one light on, or he said it might have been a flashlight because it looked like it was moving. He said you could just tell that they were tearing that place up looking for something. And he said they were in there, I think, 20 or 30 minutes. And then the next day, I talked to Tom Barron's landlord, who I was surprised was still alive. And he said that the authorities would not let him in his own trailer that Barron rented from him, that there was police tape around the trailer, and it was a week before they would let him back into the building that he owned. So those two things, I guess I kind of linked them together, but the ransacking was somebody who's, not here to tell the story anymore.
Well, I mean, there's so many stories like that in history, I know, and I can't think of the flight number right now, but I know the flight that crashed down in Antarctica, this is back, I want to say it's the 70s or 80s, a very famous flight, I just don't know the number. But, same kind of thing happened to one of the pilots there where, some guys showed up at his house and ransacked his house to steal some paperwork. And, we've seen it a lot. And if people don't think that this kind of thing could happen, you could research into the situation with John Lang, which was very close to me here where I live in Fresno. Basically a citizen of Fresno that was on kind of a police watch all the time and kind of an accountability guy. And then a few days, he said, these police are going to kill me. They're trying to kill me. And 2 days later, he shows up dead. And he's got video footage of these cops parked out in front of his house, everything. Nothing's ever happened. I mean, there's no cops have been arrested. Nobody's looked into it. So it's just interesting that sometimes if if the guys that are supposed to be protecting us are, playing for the wrong team, you could really get away with murder.
Yeah, it's when I talked to the state trooper who investigated the case, he was very forthcoming and very knowledgeable and very helpful, until he realized what I was doing. The second time I tried to follow up with him with a couple questions I had, he didn't want to talk about it. He acted like he wasn't even at the scene. So I'm a connect the dots kind of guy. I'm like you. I don't think Ness is going to leave anything or anybody's going to leave anything behind that says, yeah, we bumped this guy. But the guy who now lives, I assume he still lives there, the man who ended up living on Barron's property, told me a story about one summer he was planting a garden, and he started unearthing all sorts of weird stuff like little girls' clothing and shoes and things like that made me wonder if somebody had buried Barron's belongings or that maybe Barron had buried his report. So, like an imbecile, I got permission from the guy to dig up his backyard and spent one Friday afternoon digging 37 holes in a pattern,
really
trying to find the remnants of Tom Barron's life. So,
wow! And did you find anything at all?
Well, I found weird stuff. I found like a shower curtain and half of a man's glasses. It wasn't the style that Barron wore.
Weird.
But then later, Robin told me that I'd been digging in the wrong area. So, maybe I should grab shovels and head back out there and see what we can find.
Hey, I'll be there with you. How about coroner? Did anybody ever talk to the coroner?
Well, a great question. Well, first of all, that there were no death certificates in the county. I think that's Broward or Brevard. I'm not sure which one. And when I asked the Register of Deeds about that, she said, that is so weird because we've got death certificates for every day of the year. Somebody always dies, she said, but for that particular day, she said, we have none. But anyway, I talked to the doctor who signed the death certificates at the hospital, and he does not remember signing them. He says, I have a really good memory, but he says, I don't ever remember this guy and his wife and this little girl. So,
wow. That's
I know it's been a few decades ago, but if somebody brought in a young husband and wife and a 3-year-old girl, I would probably remember looking at their remains and signing my name, but
I would think so.
Bewildered. He was like, yeah, that's my signature, but I don't remember this at all. So. Well,
I'm definitely also a connect the dots kind of guy. And I mean, so many things that you've said tonight have, made me really think that, these are the kind of things that I think you would see if there was ever some sort of chicanery. And again, each person needs to make up their own mind. Don't listen to me or even Gary, buy his book. And, I'm sure he's going to have a lot of the evidence laid out there and then make up your mind based on the evidence, not make up your mind based on what authorities telling you or what, NASA sites might say, because of course they're not going to come out and say, yeah, we killed that guy. Get over it. That's not what you're going to read.
And maybe they did it. I mean, Barron was a severe diabetic. Maybe he blacked out the minute he turned on that, made that sharp turn. But my book will have pictures, and when you look at the site, I tried to recreate what the state trooper said he was doing, and I could not make that turn at 35 miles an hour. It was impossible. So I don't know what happened at the train tracks, but it wasn't what the FHP concluded.
No, and I mean, to me, if it was, that's what's so weird about the girl that survived, what she says, because if she remembers, well, like you said, it could have been some sort of brainwashing, but you could just put those people in the car and, put a brick on the thing and have it drive right into it too. But who knows?
I don't know. NASA's pretty good with electronics. Could you do a remote control crash? Well, I would think so. But the weird thing is Robin remembers Tom turning the key and heading out the driveway, and then remembers waking up. So I don't know how that kind of stuff works, but you would think she would remember the impact, but she doesn't.
Yeah, and I don't think that, it certainly doesn't sound like a case where you would cut somebody's brakes. That probably wouldn't help in that kind of situation because they would brake leaving their driveway or leaving their house at the stop sign. And so that's not going to really get them. But like you said, any kind of remote control craft where you are just in control of the car and you can cut off the brakes anytime or something like that is a possibility. But again, I don't know if there's necessarily any evidence for that. Is there any evidence at all in regards to the car? Was there, did anybody check levels and that kind of stuff in the vehicle? Or?
Yeah, great question. According to the state trooper, his report says that the brake fluid was fine and there was no evidence of that. What's also telling is that he cited 2 eyewitnesses to the crash. One of them was living in a house rented to North American Aviation, and I've never been able to find her. Wow. The other person refused to give a statement. He was a longtime resident and would not give a statement to the FHP. Why, I don't know, but who refuses to give a statement when they see an accident? Of course, that guy is long dead. So,
and let me hear I want to hear if I got this right again. You said that the train that Barron hit came from a NASA switchyard. Help me out with what you mean by that.
Well, NASA used that track to haul things back and forth to, I guess, the Cape, but it was actually under contract to NASA, the train that Barron struck. The railroad, and I think it was Florida East Coast Railroad, I don't have it in front of me, they refused steadfastly to give me a copy of the accident report. I have been to every source I can, national, federal, state, looking. There has to be a report from that accident, and I have been stonewalled everywhere. So,
have you tried a Freedom of Information Act request on that?
I certainly have. But I start right with the railroad itself, and they absolutely flatly denied to cooperate with me at all. Said it would be too difficult to locate. I offered to pay for researching fees. Nothing. So that's the extent of my knowledge about the train, except I did interview one of the crew members, and he doesn't remember the accident. And he said that the men that he supposedly was on the train with, he said they were never part of his shift, and he didn't work with them.
Wow. And I mean, I don't know about you. I couldn't even find a newspaper article about it happening. I had at one time a subscription to one of those sites. I forgot which one it is, where you can search old newspaper archives, and I just couldn't find anything. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, you're right. It's tough. The local papers, the Titusville and Nims papers, did the best job of covering it. Florida Today, which was a new paper at the time, did a pretty good job. But like Orlando and Daytona, not so much. I was lucky because the first guy I found was the guy who had been in the hospital with Tom Barron in December. And he actually had all of the clippings, so I just made copies of his.
And he's the one that also, isn't he the basically the witness that says that Thomas was talking a lot about being followed and having issues like that?
He did mention that. This was Mike Mogilevsky, and he has since died, but he worked for NASA. He's the guy who carried Barron's report to NASA, but they were in the hospital together in mid-December, and Barron told him everything, and of course Barron had his briefcase with him right there in the hospital. And Mogilevsky, to his dying day, said that that NASA should have been held responsible for those 3 astronauts dying, that Barron needs to be vindicated. I mean, he was a staunch advocate to Tom Barron. had life-saving information, and NASA blatantly disregarded it.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, really, when it comes down to thinking about mind control, and very interesting to read. You said that she is helping you write, or she's writing a chapter or something, the daughter that survived. Did I hear you say that right?
I'm going to devote a chapter to her. She's had a really hard life. I mean, passed around between foster families, and
oh, geez.
And some members of her family didn't want her, and there's all sorts of weird stuff. I mean, she's been in counseling for a long time. She really didn't want to talk about this initially until she determined that my motives were good. So
right.
I don't know how much Robin's going to say, but she's already said, look, I trust you. I don't think she wants 15, newsmen showing up on her doorstep saying,
right,
talk about Baron. So I may have to change a name or, do something to fuzz her identity a little bit. But she's got firsthand knowledge that, I mean, if you take a 7-year-old as credible, which I don't remember a lot from age 7, but I wasn't involved in a fatal car train accident either. So
right.
I think what she has, a lot of it is verifiable. And Baron's ex-wife, who's still alive, she spent, I think they were married 8 years. She verified a lot of what Robin told me, so I feel pretty good about Robin as a source.
Yeah, and I mean, people just need to look at the start of NASA, and many of the heads came from Nazi Germany. Something that people in the United States didn't know that we were secretly doing during Operation Paperclip, which was just giving these guys a free pass and jobs. And a lot of the work that they did over there was on mind control and things that we weren't quite doing yet, or weren't at least open about doing. So it's pretty scary when you start figuring out some of these guys were involved in less than upright things. I'm going to check the chat room too. If anybody has a question for Gary before he goes, ask it now. But go ahead. You were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, how hard would it be to implant an alternate story in a 7-year-old's head? You and I could probably do it in about 2 days. But
yeah, I mean, I've seen personally what hypnotism can do, and I mean, you can do anything to somebody that's receptive to that. I mean, I know everybody's not, but there are people that quit smoking. They've been smoking for 30 years, and they get hypnotized, and then they just don't smoke anymore. So, I mean, there's so many things that we think that are impossible to do, but really, once you've learned the mind, there's a lot you can do, and that gets kind of scary to think about, because all they would need to do is, just like you said, implant that memory of he started the car, we went to dinner, we had dinner, then he started the car, we went for a drive, and the last thing I remember is that, and then they not even remembering the accident. Kind of, you would think you'd remember that, but again, I've never been in a fatal accident where my parents died, so I also wouldn't know.
See, you've got 3 fractured skulls, and you've got a kid with a few scratches on her that doesn't remember being pushed onto the tracks, or being chloroformed in place, whatever.
Right, and then
everybody's injuries were so graphic, and of course Baron ended up underneath the car, and yet this little girl basically walks away with scratches. She was sitting or standing on the same side of the car as Tom Baron was.
And then you said, though, that he turned around to make sure that the other daughter was buckled in?
Yeah, and this is a whole nother...
Yeah, that's a crazy...
Well, Robin figured out that her younger sister was not her father's child, based on her father was killed when he fell off the scaffolding, and her younger sister, Penny, must have had a different father based on when she was born, and guess who she thinks the father was?
Tell me.
Tom Baron. Baron knew her mother in high school. Baron went off and married somebody else. 10 years later, they reconnected. They got married. They moved to Florida. And Robin always felt like Penny got extra special good treatment that she didn't. And she thinks it's because Penny was Tom's and she wasn't.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. I was going to say, I was a little confused on the story, but you're saying that definitely the younger daughter, then, it was not his daughter, correct?
The younger daughter had a different father than Robin did.
Right.
Of course, Robin always saw, I think his name was Paul Fry, was their father. And then found out years later that, the kid was born 10 months after her dad died. So then she knew, well, we don't have the same father. And then putting two and two together, the younger daughter was always Baron's favorite, and Baron didn't treat Robin very well. And she thinks, well, maybe that was his kid.
Wow, what a crazy story. Let me see if there's any other.
It's crazier.
Yeah, tell me more about it. We've got another 5 or 10 minutes here. I'm going to check and see if there's any questions while you tell us what you're going to say.
It's just what struck me was just so many weird things that should have been available when I went looking. Like the Titusville Library has a really good archive, and their phone books and city directories go back to like the 40s. And yet they're missing 1 year of phone books and city directories. It just happened to be 1967. When I went to the National Archives in D.C. and pulled this huge box of testimony from the hearing, there was only one testimony transcript that was missing. There was a note that said Thomas Ronald Barron testimony missing. Just weird stuff like that I kept coming across where it's almost like somebody went back and tried to scrub the trail to make everything this guy did disappear.
Wow. And I get in these visions of grandeur in my head where I'm like, I'm going to do a Freedom of Information Act request on that. But let me tell you what I've done here. I've got a spacewalk that nobody could find any footage of. So I did a Freedom of Information Act request in February, and we are in August, and I paid $1,450 and still have not seen it yet. So it's coming. They keep saying it's coming, and they had to do all this work, but it's just a spacewalk from 2005, Gary. I'm not talking about I asked for a spacewalk from the 70s or 80s, 2005, and it cost $1,400 for somebody who makes $52 million a day to get me a digital copy of that spacewalk. So pretty crazy, yeah.
That's freedom, Jaron. That's freedom of information.
Oh, yeah. That's what I said. I mean, can you imagine how we could be criminals and just say, yeah, just come tell me, police, whenever you want to come look through my stuff. Give me 60 days notice and pay me money, and you can come look, and I'll be scot-free.
You might want to start altering your route home every night.
I know. I'm making sure there's no train tracks around here. So
you might have touched the nerve there, big guys.
Let's see. Yeah, nobody seems to have any questions. Somebody's saying that they have their own issues with hypnotism. Totally legit. Effed up my life. I'm sorry to hear that. That's not good. But yeah, I know. Not good. But yeah, so that's awesome. Gary said he was going to have a book coming out hopefully next year. The working title is, I did write it down here somewhere.
Man.
Yeah, The Loneliest Man. Yes, correct. And yeah, so that's awesome. And I do appreciate you being on. Any other things you can think of that people might want to know? I'm trying to think of what other, you've named some things I had no idea about. So, I obviously need to do much more research in this. Do you remember the name of the, you said you spoke to the investigating officer? He's still alive?
He is. He lives in Georgia now.
Okay. So yeah, that's something that I didn't know that he was still around. And then I guess just for my own recollection, I heard you say something about death certificates. You said that there wasn't any, but then I heard you say something about somebody who signed them. So can you say that again about the death certificates?
What I have in my possession, I think, is the death certificate that the hospital actually ordered or provided. But as far as the county having any record, which is where I started, they don't have any record that 3 people died on that day.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't know. I'll have to look. I don't know if these death certificates are the official copies or if it's just something that the hospital, provided for their own paperwork. But
certainly crazy. So,
we about Thomas Barron dying on that day.
Yeah, very interesting. And just to kind of remind people, you said that that the train that hit him was a NASA contracted train or controlled. That also there was a witness, 2 witnesses to the crash. One of them refused to ever give a statement. The other one was in a house owned by North American. Correct?
Right.
Yeah, so there's lots of interesting things here with this story. Certainly isn't as open and shut as some would have you believe, because I've seen a lot of those forums that just dismiss it and say, nope, this they would, if they killed him, it would have never been done this way. They would have made it so it wasn't so obvious, and that's one of those things where you're like, well, yeah, but the fact that you get to use that excuse tells me they could have done it that way, because you get to use the excuse of, well, look, it's so obvious that it can't be true. Well, that's not the best evidence I've ever heard for why something can't be true.
Well, you're absolutely right. And if Watergate taught us anything, it's that men in power are often not that bright. And they often don't think their plans through that well. I'll throw two little more crumbs out, and then I'll let you go. But
okay.
And I'm not saying there's any foul play indicated in anything, but people that were close to Barron had a way of dying fairly quickly. His attorney suffered a fatal heart attack the same year that Barron died. And the one reporter, John Wasik, who really believed in Barron's what he was saying and thought the Barron was onto something, ended up committing suicide the next year. So,
wow,
jumped out of a plane and decided not to pull his parachute.
I'll
just leave it at that.
Well, if anybody likes to make YouTube videos, you just need to listen back to this last hour, and you've got enough content for a great video pointing out some of these anomalies. Or you can wait and read more in the book coming out hopefully next year. But I appreciate you being on, Gary. And can you tell people where they can find you if they want to see some more?
Yeah, just go to GaryCorsair.com. I try to let people know what I'm working on, and we'll have excerpts from the book and a couple other books I'm working on. And I just want to thank you. You do great work. I really appreciate how you stick your nose in things and take courageous stands, and I've been a fan of your work for a long time.
Well, thanks, Gary. I appreciate that. And yeah, it was good to finally talk to you. I know we reached out like months ago, but eventually got it, which was my goal, was just to hear from you. Because, yeah, like I said, I can't find anybody that really will stand up and say, no, I've researched this, and this is what it's usually just forums and people spouting off like they know what they're talking about, and you find out they really don't. So I do appreciate that, and maybe we'll have you on sometime when the book comes out. You can talk about it some more.
If you don't, I'll come looking for you.
All right. I'm going to vary my place where I live, though, so you're going to have a hard time finding me. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. All right. I don't think we have a break yet. I think we have about a minute left. So that was Gary Corsair. Very interesting interview. I mean, maybe I was giving myself some notes there about video. I mean, some of the things he said I've never heard before. But how could you think it's anything less than foul play? My spidey senses flew off the roof during that interview. To find out that one of the witnesses lived in the house owned by North American, to find out that the train itself was a NASA property or was controlled by NASA, to find out there was a surviving girl. I never knew that. They certainly try and keep that out of the public eye. Then to find out that his attorney, Thomas Ronald Barron's attorney, passed away the same year as Thomas Ronald Barron from a early heart attack. One of the major reporters that was into the case died the next year, jumping out of a plane. Just sounds like there's too many weird anomalies around this story. Really, the truth is out there for those who are looking for it. I mean, if somebody believes we went to the moon, to me, that person simply can't get over the fact that such a big lie could be told. And I understand that. I understand that the way that they've taught us, that is the belief. If I hear one more person tell me, well, I mean, Bill Clinton couldn't even get a blowjob in the Oval Office and it not be known. If you've done any research into the case, I will tell you that he was not lying when he said, Miss Lewinsky, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, because he didn't. That was a story that they told the public to hide the fact of what actually happened, which was when Ken Starr came out and said he had the witness, which was the double M. The double M is Mary Mahoney. Okay, not Monica Lewinsky. That's not a double M. That's a 1M. Mary Mahoney, on the other hand, was a Starbucks manager who was formerly a intern at the White House, having a extramarital, or whatever you want to call it, affair with Bill Clinton. She got a little mouthy, was going to tell some people, supposedly, maybe this Ken Starr, whatever. And then she was found shot 6 times or 5 times on the floor in the store manager's office in a Starbucks. This person had got into the store when the store had closed. There was $4,000 in the register and 0 taken. They chalked this up. It was Mary Mahoney's death and 2 or 3 other employees who were all sat down and shot multiple times in the store manager's office. And the burglar left this robber. You know, people, they love to rob things. They love to make money and get in there and just grab all the loot. Usually tell people, go over there in the corner, sit down and shut up while I steal this money. And then they go buy themselves a fancy car, fancy ring, or I don't know, Beats by Dre. I don't know, whatever people buy. But what they don't do is go into a Starbucks and murder 3 people with multiple gunshots and then leave the money in the register, walk out the door of Starbucks and lock it on your way out. That's what happened to Mary Mahoney. So you might want to check into that. But what you see is that they had to come out with this story. And so the whole thing is just a production. So I don't think that he did have anything to do with it. I mean, yeah, you can find pictures of them hugging or looking at each other longingly, whatever. But to think that, to say, and then they taught us all, you know, he can't even, if a blowjob, only 3 people knew and that couldn't keep hidden. Oh, so that means that I guess no secret's ever been kept by anybody, by any group of people. There's never been a conspiracy in the history of the world. People have never conspired to get one over on us. That's got to be the truth. Minute left, so I'll just end it with that idea that, yeah, you know, as I said, I'm riding solo. I have lots of tests I want to do. We're going to do this heliograph, and it does take money. Things aren't free, and it takes money to live. And I live very simply. I don't have car payments. I don't have credit card bills. You know, that stuff is long gone. I don't have direct TV. I don't have cable. So I live as simply as possible. I haven't bought new clothes in ages. My newest shirt is courtesy of Dave Weiss at the Flat Earth Podcast. I have a Flat Earth Podcast long sleeve, which is good because I live in Merced where it's 110 degrees every day. So that I haven't been able to wear much. But you can go to paypal.me/Jeran, which is Jeran. Donate that way. You can become a patron, which thank you so much to all my patrons. You guys are the reason that I'm able to do this. And you can go to patreon.com/jeranism and donate any amount that you want there. Patreon's cool because you can find other content producers on YouTube that you like. And rather than give us all $1 each, in which case PayPal would take 39 cents plus a 3% of it or something. So it ends up being you only are giving like 65 cents to each creator. But if you do it through Patreon, they take all the money that you're going to donate and they take it at one time. So you get that 39 cents charged once. So your $10 would end up being like $9.50 given to, say, 10 creators. Whereas if you gave $1 each to those 10 people with just regular PayPal, you're actually only giving them 65 cents each. So Patreon is cool. I like how they do it. Tons of creators there that could use some help. And we'll see you guys next week. Don't go anywhere, don't go anywhere. We've got another show coming up, but not with me. Peace!
Truth Frequency Radio is your #1 source for